Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a ruthless HOA targets Jonathan Blake's century-old Texas ranch for a luxury road project, they ignite a war they never saw coming. Land, law, and legacy collide as one man and his fierce daughter stand their ground against corruption, lies, and a battle for the soul of the soil. They say a man's land defines him. If that's true, then I'm made of dry mesquite roots, black, loamy earth, and the creaking bones of a century's worth of cattlemen. I'm Jonathan Blake, fourth-generation Texan, and the one thing I hold more sacred than God and barbecue is this land. 120 acres of stubborn, sunburnt pride just outside of Wichita Falls. The Blake Ranch has been in my family since 1903. My great-grandfather built the first cedar fence post with his bare hands. My father reinforced it with steel. Now it's mine to defend with every legal document I own and, if it ever came to that, every shell in my Winchester. I live here with my daughter Lily, 17, whip-smart, and already more bullheaded than I ever was. Since my wife passed 3 years ago, it's been just the two of us, tending cattle, patching fences, pulling calves out of heifers in the middle of the night. She's the reason I haven't turned to dust myself. We don't need much. Some peace, a working well, and for the outside world to stay the hell off our land. That last part got harder when they built Silver Ridge. It started as survey flags just north of the old fence line. Then came bulldozers, then 200 McMansions packed so tight you couldn't sneeze without hitting your neighbor's Tesla. The signs went up overnight. Gated luxury community, homes starting at $900K. A new breed of suburban settlers marching in with yoga mats, board meetings, and espresso machines louder than my tractor. And then came the HOA. At the head of it all was a woman named Charlotte Duvall, mid-50s, taut smile, impeccable wardrobe that screamed retired civil servant with delusions of governance. She didn't just walk, she arrived. You could smell ambition on her like too much perfume. I first met Charlotte on a blistering August morning. I was rolling a hay bale when her black SUV pulled up to the fence line, tires crunching gravel like she owned it. She stepped out like a senator on a photo op and waved me over like I was one of her staffers. "Mr. Blake," she called. "That's me," I replied, brushing sweat off my brow with the back of my glove. "I'm Charlotte Duvall, president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association." She said it like it meant something out here. I nodded. "All right." She smiled, tight-lipped. "We'd like to propose something that I think could be beneficial to both of us." "Uh-huh," I said, leaning against the tractor. That's rancher speak for, get to the point. "We're offering you $40,000 for a 50-foot-wide easement along your northern fence line. Just a simple road, no buildings, no structures, a straight shot through to the South County Road. It would reduce emergency response times and commuter traffic substantially. Win-win." I didn't answer right away. I just looked past her to the fields. That strip she was talking about, that was where my cattle grazed every morning, where Lily and I set out mineral blocks and ran the herd through the chute. And, more importantly, it ran straight through a patch of endangered wild indigo, a zone protected by the Federal Conservation Program. I got subsidies from the EPA for maintaining that habitat. "No," I said flatly. Charlotte blinked. "Excuse me." "No deal," I said again. "That's pasture land, and part of it's under federal ecological contract. I can't sell it, and I wouldn't even if I could." She stiffened, like I'd cussed her out. "Mr. Blake, surely you see the public benefit. I see my damn cattle needing that land to walk to water." I cut her off. "And I see your engineers didn't do their homework before building a neighborhood with one way in and one way out." Her lips twitched. I could tell she didn't like being told no, especially not by a man in dusty jeans and work boots. She adjusted her sunglasses. "Well," she said coolly, "I'll take your position back to the board. But this isn't over, Mr. Blake. I hope you'll reconsider." She got back in her car and drove off, leaving a trail of dust and entitlement behind her. I stood there a long time, just listening to the wind whistle through the mesquites and wondering what the hell kind of storm I'd just invited onto my land. But one thing I knew for certain, she wasn't getting that road. Not through my pasture. Not over my fences. Not in this lifetime. It started with a letter. I found it one morning wedged in my mailbox between a feed store flyer and an invoice for the new tractor tires. Thick white envelope, printed label, no return address. Inside was a document with an official-looking seal and the unmistakable stench of arrogance. Notice of required easement compliance, it read. Pursuant to community development recommendations and the doctrine of easement by necessity, this notice serves to inform you that Silver Ridge Homeowners Association, with endorsement from local civil planners, is requesting access to a 50-foot corridor through the northern boundary of your property. I stopped reading right about there. I reread it just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They were actually threatening legal action unless I complied and allowed access within 14 days. Not a request, a demand. Based on public benefit, my blood boiled so fast I nearly lit the damn paper on fire right then and there. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Joe Maddox. Joe's been my attorney for years. A cranky ex-prosecutor who looks like he sleeps in his office and drinks gasoline for breakfast. He answered on the second ring. "Joe, it's Blake. You got a minute? I just got some HOA grade manure in my mailbox, and I need your legal shovel." 30 minutes later, I was sitting in his office, papers spread across his desk like evidence at a murder trial. Joe adjusted his glasses, muttering to himself as he flipped through the pages. "This is nonsense," he said finally. "Easement by necessity doesn't apply here. This isn't landlocked property, and you're not impeding anyone's lawful access. They'd need a court order, eminent domain process, and a hell of a lot more than this half-baked threat." "Good," I said, "because I'm not giving them a damn inch. Send them nothing. I'll draft a cease and desist and a formal response denying consent. Also, get your cameras running. All of them. I smell stupid coming." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, around 7, I walked out with my coffee and saw something that nearly made me drop the mug. A yellow bulldozer was parked just inside the north fence line, engine off, but waiting like a coiled snake. 3 men in orange vests were pacing around the field, hammering little flags into the soil. I approached slowly. One of them noticed me and waved like this was just another Tuesday. "Y'all are on private property," I said, voice steady but sharp. The man, tall, with a clipboard and hard hat, smiled. "We're just staking out the route for future grading. HOA says everything's approved." "By who?" I asked. "County board," he shrugged. "We got word through the project manager. Said the green light came in last week." I didn't say a word. I just pulled out my phone, snapped photos of their equipment, their faces, the flags, and walked back to the house. Inside, I called Joe first, then the sheriff's office. Dispatch said they'd send someone out. While I waited, I checked my cameras. Sure enough, footage showed the equipment arriving at dawn, gate locked, fence untouched, which meant someone had cut the padlock and wheeled the damn thing in while I was asleep. I replaced the lock, then walked the line to inspect the damage. About 100 yards in, I found something else, a sheen of gray runoff along the slope near one of my lower ponds. It stank of lime and water slurry. I followed the stream until I reached the culvert, where a bucket of cement waste had been dumped over the side. The water was cloudy, sluggish, and worst of all, 2 of my Muscovy ducks floated belly up in the reeds. One of the calves, a newborn black Angus heifer, stood near the edge, staggering like it was half drunk. I ran, called the vet, called EPA, called Joe again. The vet showed up within the hour and confirmed my worst fear. The pond was contaminated. Whatever they dumped in there was toxic and fast-acting. The calf had to be put down. I stood there holding her little head as she gave out one last bleat, and something cold settled in my chest. When the deputy finally arrived, he took one look at the dozer, the flags, the camera footage, and my dead livestock, and radioed in for backup. The site was sealed off, and the sheriff himself showed up before noon. "I'm going to need everything," he said. "Footage, photos, any prior warnings. This isn't a zoning dispute anymore. This is criminal trespass and environmental damage." I gave him the folder Joe had helped me prepare. Then I walked back to the porch, sat down in my rocker, and looked out across the pasture. My fence was still standing, but the war had started. By the time the EPA agents showed up, the pond looked like a crime scene. Plastic barriers lined the shore, and yellow tape fluttered in the morning breeze like someone had murdered nature itself. The lead agent, a no-nonsense woman named Ramirez, had the kind of voice that carried over wind and cattle. She introduced herself, showed me a federal badge, and got to work like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Her team moved with surgical precision, collecting water samples, taking sediment cores, even netting the 2 dead ducks for toxicology. I told her about the calf. She just nodded grimly and jotted it down. "You've got runoff contamination," she confirmed. "Concrete slurry, most likely. High alkalinity. Can sterilize a pond like this for years." I asked her how long an investigation would take. "Depends how deep the negligence goes," she said. But this wasn't an accident. Somebody used your land like a dump site. I didn't need a degree in forensics to know who gave that order. While the EPA was busy with their testing, I headed back inside to call Joe. He was already drafting formal charges for criminal trespass, environmental violation, and damage to livestock. His tone was colder than usual. "They're not just playing dirty," he said. "They're playing federal felony dirty." Then came the cherry on top. That afternoon, I found a flyer jammed into the gate, printed on glossy stock, HOA letterhead right up top. The headline read, "Why We Must Act, a Safer, Smarter Route for Our Families." Beneath it, a picture of my field, complete with a dotted line photoshopped across it, labeled Proposed Emergency Access Road. Bullet points followed, listing the dangerous limitations of the existing access road and how one local property owner refuses to act in good faith. They were trying to spin this as a public safety issue. I read it twice before balling it up and tossing it in the trash. But that night, I saw posts on the town's online message board, comments from Silver Ridge residents complaining about traffic, mentioning an uncooperative neighbor blocking progress. I recognized the phrasing. Charlotte was seeding the public narrative, playing the martyr. The next morning, I found out she'd gone even further. The mayor's office called me. Someone from the community had submitted a formal request for review regarding non-cooperative landowners interfering with civic infrastructure. The clerk, a younger guy named Will I knew from high school, sounded uncomfortable even reading it to me. "It's weird," he admitted. "It's worded like an HOA press release, but it's got your name and parcel ID in it. You should probably get ahead of this." I hung up and called Joe. He cursed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I'm filing for a temporary injunction today," he said. "We'll block any further entry or development on your land. I'll include trespass, contamination, everything. If they even try to send a drone over your place, I'll have a judge slap them with contempt." He wasn't joking. That afternoon, we filed the paperwork. Within hours, the county clerk confirmed it. HOA, contractors, or anyone affiliated with Silver Ridge were officially barred from entering or altering any portion of my property without written permission and judicial review. But Charlotte didn't slow down. 2 days later, a piece ran in the local paper. The headline read, "Rancher Blocks Community Progress. HOA Cites Public Risk." They quoted Charlotte extensively, her concern for emergency vehicles, gridlocked roads, and an unfortunate standoff with a stubborn landowner. They didn't use my name, but it was clear as day who she meant. Even included a blurry aerial shot of my ranch, taken without my consent. Lily read it at breakfast and asked me if we were going to be okay. "We're not backing down," I told her. "Not now. Not ever." Later that week, the injunction came through. Sheriff's deputies delivered a copy straight to HOA headquarters. But the war of narratives had already begun. Charlotte had turned this into a PR campaign. Fine. She wanted a public battle? She was going to get one, with court orders, federal oversight, and the full weight of the Constitution backing me. I was in the barn replacing a busted hinge on the south stall door when Lily came running with a letter in her hand. She looked pale. "Dad," she said, "this came in certified mail from the county." The envelope was thick, official-looking, with that little red tab you tear to open. I read the header once and then again, just to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong. Notification of pending boundary review, temporary suspension of land use activities. According to the letter, 10 acres along the northern edge of my property were now under administrative review due to unresolved discrepancies regarding municipal borderlines. Until that review was completed, I was ordered to halt all activity on that portion of the land, grazing, maintenance, even fencing. I sat down on the porch bench and just stared out at the pasture, the same pasture my family had grazed cattle on since the Eisenhower administration, the same pasture I'd just fought tooth and nail to protect. This was a new front, a quiet one wrapped in bureaucracy, but no less dangerous. I called Joe. He showed up 2 hours later with a laptop, a cardboard box full of dusty files, and the face of a man about to go to war. I had a feeling they'd pull this. He muttered, setting up shop on my dining table. "Charlotte's trying to hit you where it's hardest to fight back. Land titles." We dug in. The letter referenced a 1947 municipal map that showed a chunk of land, roughly 10 acres, as falling outside the recorded limits of your deed. That map, according to the county clerk, had recently resurfaced during an internal database reorganization. Translation: someone fed the county a forged map. Joe called in a favor with the regional archivist, an old colleague named Frank who owed him a couple of drinks and a lost bet. Within hours, Frank emailed us high-res scans of the full historical map records from the county, going back to 1930. And there it was, clear as day. In 1959, the county had updated the boundaries via court order. My grandfather had taken the matter to trial when an oil company tried to claim overlapping drilling rights. The judge had ruled in our family's favor, extending the deeded property line northward by 10 acres. Frank even found the original court ruling, complete with seal and judge's signature. Joe leaned back in his chair and gave me a rare, crooked grin. "Game over," he said. "Except now we proved they faked the older map. Because here's the thing. That 1947 map they referenced, it wasn't just outdated, it wasn't real." Frank confirmed it hadn't existed in the county system until 3 months ago. Even worse, the seal on the map was off by 10 years. The county changed seals in 1952. The signature belonged to a commissioner who wasn't elected until 1950, a ghost map fabricated and uploaded into the county's electronic archive under the radar. "That's not just fraud," Joe muttered. "That's criminal forgery of public records. That's prison time." We filed a formal challenge with the county land board, attaching the 1959 ruling and requesting an immediate lift of the suspension order. Joe also notified the sheriff's office of suspected forgery. By the next morning, a detective was on the phone asking if we had the metadata from the electronic file. We did. Frank had it logged and time-stamped. I told Lily not to worry, but I could see it was eating at her. Every time she looked out at the pasture, I saw the worry in her eyes, like a piece of home had been stolen right out from under us. I told her we'd get it back. We always do. 2 days later, I was stacking hay when the deputy rolled up again, this time with a warrant for HOA's office. I didn't expect to feel satisfaction when the HOA's office got raided, but damn if it didn't warm my weathered old heart just a little. Deputy Marshall showed up with a pair of county detectives and a warrant signed by the district judge himself. The Silver Ridge HOA office sat nestled inside a repurposed model home, just past the gated entrance, complete with a fake fireplace and a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a dental spa. When the officers walked in, Charlotte Duvall was in the middle of a board meeting. I wasn't there, but Joe told me later that she looked like someone had just kicked over her podium. They hauled out 3 computers, 2 file boxes, and 1 smug secretary who suddenly developed a case of selective amnesia. 2 days after the raid, Joe and I were called into the sheriff's office to review findings. I expected the forged map. I did not expect what else they found. There was a folder clearly labeled Alternate Deed Strategies, containing no less than 6 mock-ups of supposed boundary maps, each with slight variations. One showed the northern 10 acres donated by a fictitious ancestor of mine. Another listed the area as disputed marshland under municipal review, except the land is dry, fenced, and grazed every season since Truman was president. Even more damning, emails between Charlotte and someone in the county records office. Buried in the thread was a PDF file of the fake 1947 map, attached with a note reading, "Use this version if anyone pushes back. Let's keep the road conversation alive." It was conspiracy, plain as day. Joe nearly laughed when he read it. This is felonious level stupid. But it didn't end there. In another file labeled HOA Strategy, Access Route, they'd compiled emails to and from the HOA board discussing ways to encourage cooperation with me, including one that suggested offering to leak complaints about my property to local animal control. Another proposed staging traffic issues near the ranch road to provoke a reaction. That's when I stopped smiling. They weren't just forging maps. They were planning psychological warfare. I called Lily into the room, showed her the pages. She stared at them like they were in a foreign language, then looked at me with eyes hard as flint. "They're trying to break us," she said. "Yeah," I nodded. But they underestimated who they're dealing with. Meanwhile, the EPA investigation was wrapping up. Agent Ramirez returned with a full environmental impact report. The pond wasn't just contaminated, it was ruined. Alkali levels off the charts, long-term damage to the soil, and a risk to the nearby water table. The estimated restoration cost, over $80,000. EPA filed formal charges for environmental negligence against unknown parties, but Ramirez made it clear, "We know who gave the order. It's just a matter of paperwork now." Joe worked fast. We filed a civil suit against the HOA and Charlotte Duvall personally, trespassing, property damage, fraud, environmental harm, attempted coercion. Then we forwarded the evidence to the district attorney. The next week, I was out checking fence lines when a news van rolled up to the main gate. The driver leaned out the window. "Are you Jonathan Blake?" I nodded slowly. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the charges filed against the HOA president. She's being indicted for forgery and environmental violations. You care to comment?" I didn't answer. I just tipped my hat and walked back toward the barn. Later that evening, a neighbor from down the road, an old rancher named Alton, dropped by with 2 cases of Lone Star beer and a grin as wide as a hay baler. "You just gave the whole damn county a show," he said. About time someone stood up to those HOA tyrants. By nightfall, I had 12 text messages from people I barely knew, thanking me for holding the line. It wasn't over, but it felt like the wind had shifted. The first court date came quicker than I expected. Charlotte's lawyers had filed a motion to dismiss the civil case, arguing that the HOA was acting in the public's best interest and that any accidental environmental incidents were the result of third-party contractors. That didn't fly with Judge Redding. I liked Redding. Vietnam vet, no nonsense, sharp as a tack despite being almost 80. He looked over the folder Joe handed him, flipped through the maps, the photos, the EPA report, and then raised an eyebrow so hard it could have sliced wood. "Dismissal denied," he said flatly. "Proceed." Charlotte didn't show up that day. Her lawyers did, all in matching gray suits and jittery expressions, but she was nowhere in sight. Rumor had it she'd taken a step back from her position as HOA president. Someone on the board leaked an email claiming she was focusing on personal legal matters. I figured that meant ducking behind lawyers and hoping the firestorm passes. It wasn't passing. That same week, the sheriff's office issued a formal arrest warrant. Charges: forgery of public records, criminal trespass, and violation of federal environmental protections. 3 felonies, just like that. She turned herself in 2 days later, press all over it, camera flashes lighting up the station like the damn 4th of July. Her mugshot hit the local news by evening, right beside a B-roll of my ranch and a quote from the EPA report. Suddenly, nobody was asking if I was overreacting anymore. But the surprises weren't done yet. Joe got a call from the district attorney's office. There was more. During the forensic sweep of HOA devices, the tech team found files connecting Charlotte's actions not just to my land, but to multiple attempts to acquire property along the outskirts of Silver Ridge. She had a pattern: pressure, intimidation, fake notices, sometimes even threats of code violations. We weren't just dealing with one rogue decision. She'd done this before. And one of the names on that list? Harold Dunn. Old Man Dunn owned a stretch of scrubland north of town. He died last year, but his niece inherited the land. Turns out Charlotte had sent her a letter 2 months before he passed, offering pennies on the dollar and warning that non-compliance with neighborhood planning might result in legal complications. The girl showed the letter to Joe. He nearly exploded. "Coordinated land grabbing, that's what this is." So we reached out. 5 other property owners had similar stories. None had followed through with sales, but all had received letters. One even had HOA inspectors show up unannounced and take photos of his septic tanks. None of those properties were under HOA jurisdiction. That gave Joe an idea. He proposed a class action suit, all landowners targeted by Charlotte's HOA tactics joining forces. Damages, fraud, emotional distress. One of them had a disabled son who couldn't sleep for weeks after strangers kept walking up to the property and measuring setbacks. Within a week, Joe had affidavits, testimonies, and witness statements. The case was growing fast. Meanwhile, Lily and I tried to keep things running on the ranch. Hard to pretend it was normal when you had to stop repairing your irrigation pump to give a reporter a no comment. But we managed. One morning, as we were sorting cattle near the west paddock, Lily looked over and said, "You think she ever thought this would work?" I looked across the field to where the fake road was supposed to go. Just grass, untouched, like it always had been. "No," I said. "I think she thought no one would fight back." Charlotte's indictment came down like a falling barn beam, sudden, loud, and with no room to dodge. 12 federal counts and 7 state charges: forgery, environmental violations, attempted coercion of landowners, tampering with county records, criminal conspiracy. Every inch of her paper empire was turning into a bonfire, and she was the one holding the matchbox. Joe and I sat in his office when the grand jury results were read out. He sipped his coffee like it was bourbon and muttered, "I haven't seen this many felonies lined up since that banker embezzled from the county back in '98. And it wasn't just Charlotte anymore." The investigation into the HOA board had started small, just a review of their meeting notes and financials, but it snowballed. Turns out several of the board members had known about her schemes. A few had signed off on letters they knew were fake. One even approved funds to hire a private infrastructure consultant, who turned out to be Charlotte's nephew with no credentials and a suspended driver's license. The sheriff's office issued subpoenas. 3 board members lawyered up. One fled the state. Another turned state's witness. Silver Ridge HOA wasn't just collapsing, it was being dismantled by the courts in real time. A temporary oversight committee was installed to manage essential services, trash pickup, maintenance, utilities, but all expansion plans were frozen. That emergency access road they'd fought so hard for? Off the table, permanently. EPA returned with final damages. Their estimate had gone up. The full cost to restore my contaminated pond, replace dead livestock, and replant the affected ecological buffer was now $250,000. Joe added it to the civil suit as compensatory damages, along with pain and suffering, loss of use, and legal fees. Charlotte's defense lawyers tried to float a plea deal. 15 years, suspended to 5, no admission of guilt. The DA laughed in their faces. "You forged federal records," he said in court. "You tampered with the land registry. You knowingly contaminated protected property. You don't get to walk away from that with a slap on the wrist and a book deal." The trial was set for late spring. In the meantime, the media circus kept circling. News vans parked outside Silver Ridge like buzzards over a dying deer. Reporters wanted interviews. Op-eds flooded local papers about HOA tyranny and the rising abuse of private governance in land use conflicts. Lily even got interviewed by a law school publication after they heard about her interest in property law. She nailed it too, calm, clear, and sharper than I ever was at that age. I watched her speak in that video, standing in front of our barn in boots and a windbreaker, explaining why private landowners needed to know their rights. Pride doesn't even begin to cover it. One evening, just before sunset, I walked out to the rebuilt north fence line. New cedar posts, reinforced mesh, and a gate that hadn't creaked since I hung it. There was a sign posted now. Weatherproof, bold letters. Private property, no access. Federally protected land. Below it, a second plaque, freshly screwed into the post. Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted. Title 18 U.S. Code Paragraph 1365. I stood there a while, looking at the horizon, watching the wind ripple through the grass like waves. The damage she caused wouldn't disappear overnight, but neither would we. The land was still here, and so were we. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Locals, press, students, even a few other ranchers from out of county who'd followed the case like it was a prize fight. They came to see Charlotte Duval finally answer for everything she'd done. And I can't say I blame them. She walked in wearing beige and defeat. No more designer pantsuits, no smug expressions. Just a woman whose entire empire had crumbled beneath her high heels. The prosecution opened with a statement that left no room for interpretation. They laid out the fake maps, the tampered files, the illegal construction attempt, the contaminated pond, the dead livestock, the abuse of HOA power, all in cold, measured detail. Photos, witnesses, emails with her name on them. We testified, one after another. I spoke for over an hour about the history of the land, what it meant to my family, how we'd fought to protect it. I told the jury about the morning I found my pond full of concrete, about burying that calf, about what it felt like to see strangers staking flags in soil that had belonged to my bloodline for over a century. They listened. Some even nodded. One juror wiped a tear. Lily testified next, calm, clear, fierce. She spoke about being 17 and watching strangers trample the land she was raised on. She talked about feeling powerless until she saw what the law could do when you used it right. By the end of the week, Charlotte's defense team was scrambling. The board members who had turned witness gave damning accounts, admitting they'd signed things they knew were lies. One even cried on the stand, claiming Charlotte had threatened to ruin her family if she didn't comply. The verdict came down on a Friday, guilty, on all counts. The judge didn't waste time. For the charges of criminal forgery, environmental destruction, attempted coercion, and conspiracy to defraud property owners, this court sentences you to 12 years in state and federal custody, effective immediately. 5 of those years will be served under federal supervision for violations involving protected land. The remainder will be served consecutively under state law. No parole eligibility for 8 years. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stood there as the bailiff cuffed her and led her out the side door away from the cameras. The courtroom exhaled in silence. Back at the ranch, we got word a week later that the HOA board had been officially dissolved. A regional oversight group had been brought in to administer the neighborhood until a new legal framework could be created. The residents of Silver Ridge. They sent a letter, signed by dozens of families, a formal apology, gratitude, an offer to help rebuild the damage Charlotte caused. Some even sent volunteers, college kids, retirees, a couple of landscapers. They helped dig out the contaminated soil, replant wild grasses, clear debris. One woman brought home-cooked meals. Another cried as she told me, "We had no idea what she was doing. We're sorry." A month later, the EPA formally designated my northern field as federally protected ecological land. That meant no roads, no development, no HOA access, ever again. Any interference would require a federal hearing. Lily got her acceptance letter from UT Law just a few weeks after that. Full scholarship, environmental and land use law. When I asked her if she was sure, she grinned. "I'm going to make sure no one else has to fight this fight alone." The pond was still quiet, no ducks yet, but the water had cleared. We'd rebuilt the dam, filtered the runoff, and replanted the bank with native reeds and milkweed. And right there, by the gate where they'd tried to stake a road through my bloodline, I put up a new sign, cast iron, bolted deep. Here stood the last attempt to steal a Texan's land. Underneath it, a small plaque, Blake Ranch, S. July 1903, still standing.